This time starting in this video, we're looking at the Napoleonic Wars. So first of all, we need to look at the end of the French Revolutionary Wars, which took place before the Napoleonic Wars. As throughout the French Revolutionary Wars, which took place from 1792 until 1802, the French had managed to spread their revolutionary principles over much of Europe. So in 1797, the French were able to defeat the first coalition after the Austrians agreed to the Treaty of Campo Formio. Now, the War of the Second Coalition began in 1798 with the French invasion of Egypt headed by Napoleon. Now, the Allies used this opportunity to regain the territories lost from the First Coalition. Now, although the war started well for the Allies, once Napoleon had successfully overthrown the Directory in his coup d'etat, which we looked at in the last video about the French Revolution, and he had reorganised the French army, the French were able to force Austria to seek peace after the French victory at Hohenlinden, thus resulting in the Treaty of Lunéville in 1801. So with Austria and Russia out of the war, the UK found itself increasingly isolated, and they agreed to the Treaty of Amiens in 1802. However, the British were becoming increasingly angered by Napoleon's intervention into Western Europe, particularly Switzerland, Germany, Italy and the Netherlands. So for example, in Switzerland in 1802, Napoleon intervened to stop the instability, and the British saw this as a breach of the Treaty of Amiens. So this meant that the British Prime Minister, Henry Addington, gave France an ultimatum to leave Switzerland. Now, as Napoleon wasn't quite ready for war, he attempted to make a number of deals with the British, yet none of these were satisfactory, and on the 18th of May 1803, the British declared war on France, marking the beginning of the Napoleonic Wars. So this started off with the Third Coalition. The Third Coalition was formed in 1805, and this was when Napoleon had crowned himself with the Iron Crown of Lombardy in Italy, and in Germany Napoleon ordered the execution of Louis Antoine de Bourbon, who was the Duke of Enghien. Now, these two events meant that both Austria and Russia joined the British in the war against France. But in the first years of the war before this, the British were under constant threat of a French invasion, yet the Royal Navy were able to prove their mastery of the seas and destroyed a Franco-Spanish fleet at the Battle of Trafalgar in October 1805. So the Franco-Spanish fleet lost 22 ships, while the British lost none, and this battle confirmed British supremacy at sea. However, Napoleon had started to build his Grande Armée through conscription and volunteers, and Napoleon was able to show his military prowess through the Ulm campaign. And in October, Napoleon was able to capture an Austrian army of 23,000 under General Mack, and then Napoleon secured a decisive French victory over the combined Russo-Austrian force under Tsar Alexander I at the Battle of Austerlitz in early December 1805. So this meant that on the 26th of December 1805, Austria and France signed the Treaty of Pressburg, which took Austria out of the war and out of the coalition. Victory at Austerlitz also meant that Napoleon was able to dissolve the Holy Roman Empire and set up the Confederation of the Rhine, which was initially formed from 16 German states, and this was completed in July 1806. So after the breakdown of the Third Coalition and Napoleon's creation of a Confederation of the Rhine, Prussia feared the rise of French power in Central Europe. So this meant that the Fourth Coalition partners included Prussia, Russia, Saxony, Sweden and Great Britain. Now, Napoleon was then able to initially defeat the Prussians at the Battle at Jena-Auerstedt on 14th of October 1806 before capturing Berlin and advancing to the Russian border. Now, the result was one of the bloodiest battles of the Napoleonic War, and one fought in awful conditions. And the Battle of Eylau was indecisive, yet it cost 25,000 French casualties and 15,000 Russian ones. Now, the crucial battle took place at Friedland in June 1807, where the French were able to trap the Russians against the River Aller and destroy the Russian force. And this resulted in the Treaty of Tilsit in July 1807. So in the Treaty of Tilsit, Russia agreed to join the Continental System, which was a large-scale embargo against British trade. So the treaty was particularly harsh on Prussia because Napoleon demanded much of the Prussian territory. However, despite the end of the Fourth Coalition, Britain remained at war with France, and the hostilities were resumed later in 1807 when a Franco-Spanish force invaded Portugal, which was one of Britain's major allies. So this commenced the Peninsular War, when Napoleon's empire fought against Bourbon Spain, assisted by the UK and Portugal, for control of the Iberian Peninsula. So the Fifth Coalition was triggered in 1809, when Austria joined Britain once again in the fight against France and Napoleon. And there were a number of major engagements between France and Austria from April to July, and the casualty rates were high on both sides. So for example, on 31st of May 1809, in the Battle of Aspern-Essling, Napoleon lost one of his most talented generals, Jean Lannes, along with 21,000 men. And this put a dent in the myth of Napoleon's invincibilities. Now, Britain did use this diversion to launch the unsuccessful Walcheren campaign, and this was an expedition to the Netherlands which intended to open up another front. However, the Walcheren campaign involved little fighting, but heavy losses from the sickness which struck the British troops. Now eventually, Napoleon was able to achieve the breakup of the Austrian army in the Battle of Wagram, which took place between the 5th and the 6th of July 1809. So the resulting treaty was called the Treaty of Schönbrunn, which imposed harsh peace terms, and Austria had to cede the Duchy of Salzburg to Bavaria, and it also lost its access to the Adriatic Sea. Now Austria were also forced to join Napoleon's continental system, which we talked about earlier. The next thing to look at is Napoleon's invasion of Russia and then the Sixth Coalition, as this was one of the turning points of the Napoleonic War. As the French invasion of Russia, which was also known as the Patriotic War of 1812, was launched on the 24th of June 1812. And by the end of 1810, Tsar Alexander I had stopped complying with the continental system, and Napoleon wanted to pressurize the Russians to cease trade with the British to force the British to sue for peace. Now Napoleon was able to raise the Grande Armée to 685,000, which was the largest army ever assembled in history. Now they soon crossed the Niemen River in an attempt to defeat the Russians. Now Napoleon was initially able to push through and win a number of small engagements whilst the Russians retreated. So Napoleon was then victorious at a major engagement in Smolensk, and Napoleon was then able to narrowly win at the Battle of Borodino on September the 7th, despite the fact that the battle resulted in 70,000 casualties. On September the 14th, the Grande Armée entered Moscow, yet it had already been abandoned and burned by the Russians. Napoleon now waited for Tsar Alexander I to sue for peace, yet the offer never came. So after this event, the French started to seriously struggle with a winter which had come earlier than normal. So through hypothermia and lack of food, many of the Grande Armée were killed in the campaign, and when they crossed the Berezina River, only 27,000 soldiers remained. So this meant that the Grande Armée had lost 380,000 men, and 100,000 men had been captured. So this major failure for Napoleon triggered a major shift in European politics, because Austria, Prussia and Sweden rejoined the fight against Napoleon and started the War of the Sixth Coalition in March 1813. So Napoleon was able to win some initial victories against the enemy, but he suffered a crushing defeat in October 1813 at the Battle of Leipzig. So this decisive victory for the coalition forces meant that Napoleon was forced to return to France. So the coalition forces continued to press their advantage, and by March 1814, Paris had been captured and Napoleon was forced to abdicate to the island of Elba. However, now we need to look at Napoleon's return and then finally the Seventh Coalition, as Napoleon was able to retake power in France from Louis XVIII when the soldiers sent to kill him instead united with Napoleon. So the coalition forces made it clear that they would not negotiate with Napoleon, which made the War of the Seventh Coalition certain to occur. And at the start, Napoleon was able to defeat the Prussian forces at the Battle of Ligny on June 15th. However, this was his last victory, because on the 18th of June 1815, the coalition forces were able to defeat Napoleon and his French forces at the Battle of Waterloo. Now, after his defeat, Napoleon returned to France, where he signed his second and final abdication on June the 22nd, and 6 days later, Louis XVIII was restored to the French throne. So that is the Napoleonic Wars. Thank you for watching, and see you soon. Bye.